Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 218. Denial. If we live in denial. And that makes this session today one of our most complex and intricate in our comma series, but probably the most important. Because basically we all sort of have to live in denial about our lives, because we have to get up in the morning, we have to have a shower, we have to get out of tracksuit pants and somehow face the day and communicate with people. So to do that, we have to deny a lot of our reality. So we're going to start with the meaning of denial. It's a very simple, straightforward definition today. But then we're moving into something quite expansive and important. We're looking at the role of denial in our universities. And of course, it's incredibly important to thinking about our research and all of us as researchers, the role of denial in our culture and the impact of that on our universities. So that's a bit of a stunning point. And as always, through the depression of the comma series, we try to finish with something buoyant and optimistic and I hope enabling for you. 5 strategies for you today to manage denial. How do we move denial from a full stop in our lives to a comma? Let's do this. So we're going to start off, if we can, and this is the provocative bit of our conversation today. We're going to start off with a series of key questions for you. And these are provocative questions, okay? Is there something in your life that didn't turn out the way that you planned it? Is there something in your life that you're not enjoying as much as you thought you would? Has someone in your life let you down? And of course, are you disappointed by something that you've done, or indeed that you haven't done? The final question's the tough one for all of us. Are you living the life that you thought you would live? Wow, this is hard stuff, I know. These questions move us into really tough reflections on our personal and professional experiences, but also our expectations. Are we living the life that we thought we would live? Wow. Now, these are hard questions because it's very tough in life. It's very tough to sit in vulnerability. Really hard, I get that. It's much easier, much more pleasant to sit in denial. So think about that great question of denial that we use every single day, many times each day. We ask people, or we're asked, how you doing? How you going? How you going? How you going? How you going? To which the answer invariably is, fine. Yeah, fine. Fine. You're not fine. That's denial. So for those of us who work in universities though, denial is actually acidic to our very purpose, our very role in knowledge, because denial demeans universities and it demeans our commitment to knowledge and knowledge development. Denial activates particular language, particular vocabulary that provides blockages and blocks to prevent us reaching the truth. So where denial can escalate, and we're living this at the moment by the way, where denial can escalate is not only when it hides the truth, that's one form of denial, it hides the truth, but denial when it hides the truth and then configures an entire alternative reality. So we see this, of course, in the most grotesque of Holocaust deniers. We see it in climate change deniers, but of course there's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these communities that are based on denial, ignoring the truth, constructing a completely alternative reality and living there most of the time. And so we've got a real problem when we not only deny the truth, but construct a whole alternative reality and live there. So this is where you start to hear the word debunking, and this is what I mean about language and language interventions. So debunkers, right? So climate change debunkers, right? Evolution debunkers. So knowledge, evidence and truth, you can't critique them because they're knowledge, evidence and truth, but you can certainly debunk them. Let's debunk truth. Let's go there. So denial can be really banal, so we need to start there. So you've made a mistake, you deny the mistake, and we have a desire, we can't acknowledge that desire, so we live in denial about that desire. So it can also be quite banal. And of course it goes up to denial creating incredible harm. And we have this incredible ability as humans, to stay away from the painful, to stay away from the harmful. Keeps us alive, but it also means that we dodge the unpleasant. We dodge that which is a little bit disquieting for us. So we try and stay, most of the time, convenient. We try and stay happy. And that's what denial does for us. Denial allows us to move through life without having to confront on a daily basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, the truly dreadful things that are happening in the world. But where this becomes problematic for universities is where we start to see research consensus being overturned. That is incredibly dangerous. So that occurs when we deny evidence, we question or debunk methodology, we debunk epistemology, we question the very consensus of scholars. So okay, 99% or 97% of scholars are saying this, but what about those 3%? Let's talk to that 3% because they're really important. So that's the denial of consensus through debunking. But as I've said, the great danger is when an alternative reality is created. So, climate change is not that big a deal. Think about how inconvenient it is to travel on public transport because cars are great. Denial. Think about one of my personal favourites, and I have many, but the evolution deniers. Oh, they're a great group. So that is the weird end of denial. They're a fun, happy group of people. And you might ask, well, what's the actual point of denying evolution still? And it creates a distrust of knowledge. This is why it's so dangerous. It creates a distrust of knowledge, distrust of evidence, and where I get very concerned is it creates a distrust of clever people. And because of that, that's why we're in the mess we're in right now. And of course the flat earthers, again a community I love monitoring online, they're fantastic. The flat earthers are part of this as well. So why denial is so dangerous, and here we go. Why denial is so dangerous is a combination of social media that I'm going to talk about in a second. So social media, but also an incredibly important concept from Sykes and Matzer, techniques of neutralization. One of the most important concepts developed in the 20th century, and it was published in 1957. So what Sykes and Matzer argue is that very, very small communities, so a very few number of people, are doing something pretty weird. They're doing something pretty out there. And if they're one person doing something sort of out there, basically institutions start to shun them, or they might end up in jail. But what happens is these illicit communities meet. So even a few people gather in a community, and when they do, their ideas, they share ideas, and the ideas become more extreme. Yep, so that's the danger of this. So we've got a few weirdos, bless, love a good weirdo, but we've got a few weirdos, and when the weirdos get together, they become increasingly weird. So you can see where that's going, right? So of course when Sykes and Matzer published their great work, of course the internet wasn't even a thing, it wasn't even considered, let alone social media. And that meant that illegal and weird behaviours were less visible. So in Adelaide, for example, the cutter community, let's use as an example, the interesting piercing community, there weren't many of them, so it was a small little group and pretty well invisible. What happens through social media is that these alternative communities are deterritorialized, so they can meet online, right? So that means if you've got the cutters, you've got the interesting piercing communities, but also the darker communities like the feeders are a great example, or, and I'll call a spade a shovel, the sexual abuse communities, let's just put that out there. They can meet online, so they then form a community, all talk with each other, and their ideas become more extreme. Do you see what's happening? Yeah. Now, these people can create communities, and pretty big ones, online. They can share and normalize their behaviors. They find each other, and they become even more extreme in their behaviors. Remember, it's just as easy to share a racist tweet as it is to share a refereed article from an outstanding scholar. It's just as easy to send both. And this is what, over a decade ago, I think I published the piece in 2007, I think. This is what I call the Google effect. So that's the consequences of the search engine Google, because it flattens information literacy. It flattens information literacy. So this is, of course, an anti-intellectual movement. It's an anti-expertise movement. It's also anti-learning, okay? This means simple ideas expressed in very basic vocabulary dominate. That's our current age. But if we extend on from Sykes and Matzer, the problem with denial we see is it becomes a denial of expertise. And this is where I get into one of my favourite things in the universe, the Overton Window. I'm obsessed by the Overton Window. And look, I've spent decades of my life, I wish I was lying, I've spent decades of my life trying to align the Overton Window with Perry Anderson, Gramsci to a certain extent, but Perry Anderson's theorisation of hegemony. So Joseph Overton is remarkable for many things, but of course his concept became the Overton Window. So some people play darts, some people play chess. I spend a lot of time thinking about how the Overton Window operates with hegemony. But the Overton Window refers to the range of policies, ideas if you will, that are politically acceptable to most of the population at a particular time. So this is not about truth. This is not about something being important or being real. This is about the viability of a particular idea at a specific time. So the Overton Window provides us, if you will, a smorgasbord of possible policies that could emerge at this moment in our history without seeming too extreme, okay? Therefore, what's happened in the last 5 years is deeply disturbing, because I would argue that the Overton Window has been smashed, and so now the window has become a glass house, and we know what happens to people that live in those. So the parameter of acceptable ideas has widened. So denial and deniers have a huge effect on what we take seriously, what we value. So denial is a neglect of information, certainly. It's also a neglect of the information that's unpalatable or anxiety creating, or indeed simply outside of our experiences. So the anti-vaxxer community, Holocaust deniers, climate change deniers, they're the clearest examples for us right now. So think about, and this disturbs me a lot, I haven't talked about this publicly, by the way, because I get so disturbed by it, but think about the truly bonkers response to Greta Thunberg in the last year. Think about that, right? Here is a young woman who cares about the world and expressed that. And think about the scale of abuse that young lass experienced for simply, like most of us are at 15, expressing idealism and care for the world, right? So what we have there is denial, and it's also denial through, and this is why it's a useful example, shooting the messenger rather than listening to the message. So the greatest denial is simply playing, if you will, the man, not the ball. So therefore, the theory of denial that is most meaningful for me, which might actually transform how you think about denial and certainly change my life, was incredibly emotional for me to go back to, getting a bit teary now, because this scholar who created what I think is the best theory of denial was incredibly important to my PhD, and in fact has been like an intellectual friend holding me by the hand throughout, really, since my entire academic years, career, since I was probably 20. But I therefore want to summon the great and sadly the late sociologist Stanley Cohen. Stan the Man Cohen. Now look, I disagree with a lot of what Stan the Man did, but the disagreement is incredibly productive, because Stanley Cohen is the best of us, the best of intellectuals, and captured really the best of intellectual life. But Stanley Cohen, in his book States of Denial, described 3 types of denial. He started with literal denial, the simple and outright rejection that something is happening. So basically this is lying. The first stage of denial is lying. So climate change deniers are here. And of course, these liars are often very well funded, because the lies allow a particular income stream to be maintained. The lies allow particular industries to continue without critique. The second type of denial from Cohen was interpretive denial. Now in this case, this is an interesting one, the facts are not contested. Okay, the facts exist, okay, facts. But in this case, the interpretation is critiqued, and the interpretation starts to warp the meaning and interpretation of those facts. So let's use climate change again. Yes, change is happening. Facts, change is happening. But that's part of the natural fluctuation of greenhouse gas accumulation. So yes, there's some change. There's always been change. Sort yourself out. The third type of denial, and wow, this is the big one, is implicatory denial. Implicatory denial. Here we go. The facts are not denied. The interpretation is not denied. Instead, this is denial that allows the implications, the social, political, and intellectual implications on us to be denied. Let me explain. So, we agree with the facts. We agree with the interpretation. But we don't accept responsibility for anything. So we know all this stuff, but we fail to actually do anything at all in response. So we're all, as you can see, implicated in this category in some way. None of us, as individuals, act as we should when we are confronted with difficult truths and reality that means that we have to actually change our lives. So think about it. You agree, I know you do, you agree with climate change, with the facts, with the interpretation. But you continue to get in an aeroplane. You continue to use non-renewable sources of energy. You continue to get in a car. So as you can see through Cohen, denial is not malice. It's not stupidity. I hate the word stupidity, you know that. It's not stupidity. Denial is actually part of our social organisations. It's part of our universities, part of our families, part of our friends, part of our workplaces. And even though I really dislike the word stupidity, I did want to summon the legend that is George Orwell's definition of denial. And he described denial as, quote, protective stupidity, end of quote. So as you can see, wow, this mode of denial, this model of denial is an extraordinarily debilitating full stop. Now as academics, as well-educated people, we hold information literacy. We can find the facts, we can discover evidence, we can configure an interpretation. But we use implicatory denial every single day. Because, for example, we make a decision, let's flick through Instagram rather than reading for our PhD. Let's complain about our lives rather than actually doing anything about our lives. And let's read tweets, let's laugh at memes rather than read the deep, difficult, scholarly work that can intervene, can transform the truths for ourselves and fellow citizens. So as you can see, denial of all these types is the enemy of research. But of course, we as researchers, we as people, we have to manage denial every single day. At its most basic, Ajik Vaki and the great late Danny Brower confirmed in their book, Denial, Self-Deception, False Beliefs and the Origins of the Human Mind, weird, fascinating book, can I say, and they argued, quite depressingly can I state, that all of living must be based on denial because we must deny death to continue to live, because people die every single day. And if we thought about that too much, we really wouldn't bother living. So as you can see, denial is a way to reduce anxiety, reduce frustration, to make our feelings, to make facts more tolerable. Denial emerges from not only ignoring the truth or ignoring reality, but also having inattention to it. So a denial of reality, for example, is smoking cigarettes, not exercising, drinking too much booze. All of that stuff increases our likelihood of death. But continue to smoke on up, drink on up, just not exercise, watch bad television, like it's all going to be okay. Well, of course it's not. So emotion creates a knee-jerk response for us and shortcuts our thinking. So, oh, this feels really pleasant, I'll do this, rather than think, oh, right, well, this is actually going to kill me. And that's why denial blocks our consciousness that the world could actually be different. And of course, it means that every day most of us live in a pretty bizarre pretend land. You know, we pretend that the emails matter. We pretend emails matter, our reply to that email, that's important. Let's CC half of South Australia because my email is so important. Let's contribute to this meeting. Let me go to this meeting and make my point forcibly because my point at this meeting really matters. Or indeed, that my view of the world is terribly significant. So as you can see, on a daily basis, we all summon a really complex rendering of denial. We configure a whole alternative reality where we are the star of the world. We're important. Our views matter. But the world is actually set up so that we can survive, so that we can live through the lens of denial. Wow, okay, so this has incredible consequences for us in universities in terms of thinking about research. Crucial. But it also has a huge impact on you, doesn't it? You as PhD students. Because you on a daily basis summon a series of denial behaviours that actually stop you passing your PhD. So denial is integral to imposter syndrome. Denial allows you every day to live through a series of lies. And these lies include constructing completely alternative views of what the university workforce looks like, what publishing looks like, how teaching is supposedly valued in international higher education, and of course those relationships with industry. And of course we never drill deeply into the complexity and plurality of industry. So we construct a series of denial narratives. Sometimes they're nostalgic, sometimes they're wish fulfillment, and those narratives tell us stories about how great we are. and how very soon, we're going to be appreciated. But of course, life, let alone research, is just not like this. We have, as humans, an incredible ability to stay away from the painful, to stay away from the hurtful, to dodge the unpleasant, to avoid that which is just a little bit disquieting, and stay in the convenient. Let's just stay in the happy for one more hour. And that's why we see in doctoral programs PhD students using blame of supervisors, blame of the university, blame of the dean, blame of the workforce, blame of publishers. But of course, this blame focuses on other people, and all of that is based on the student denying the work that they haven't done. So denial for students is they haven't read enough, you haven't read enough, you're not writing enough, and perhaps, just perhaps, you, all of us, we're not as talented, we're not as brilliant as the narratives in our heads are telling us we are. So in students, we see this, as a supervisor, I do see this a lot, when you offer any feedback. So you're actually engaging with the student work and you're offering feedback, and that feedback is read as a criticism of the student, not the work, the student. And I have had students that when I've offered feedback, when I've offered commentary, they've written to the Vice-Chancellor and complained about my feedback. I wish I was joking, So, like, I'm doing what a supervisor's meant to do, which is stopping you failing your PhD, and that feedback is so confronting to the student's notion of their own reality that they write to the Vice-Chancellor to complain about the feedback. Think about that as a denial narrative, okay? We see it, for example, when a student expects their supervisor to get them a high-paying job. So my supervisor, he can't get me a job, she can't get me a job, can't get me a job. Again, living in denial, because that supervisor is probably battling to hold on to their own job in international contemporary higher education, let alone help you. So as you can see, there are thousands of these techniques of denial for PhD students. And look, I know that this is incredibly depressing. This session is unbelievably depressing. So to save us from this complete negativity, let's now move to the final little bit of the gig today and show you how we move on from this, how we make sure that denial is a comma, that you sit in it for a moment, take a breath and move on. Now we're going to use some of Cohen's models of denial to work through this and provide 5 strategies for you today to move on, to get yourself out of this, to see the world as it is rather than how you would like it to be. 1. The time to deal with denial is right now. Today. Today. All of us have areas of denial in our lives, our own Overton window, if you like. We have our own techniques of neutralization. The weird stuff we do, we share with other weird people, and it becomes more extreme. But learning from Stan Cohen, we need to think about which mode of denial we are deploying. And we have to know and understand those areas in our life that right now are simply too much for us to manage. And name them. Because when you can name those areas that are just too much for you, you can then manage them. So if you are not reading enough for your thesis today, if you haven't written anything on your thesis today, then own that. Come on, own that. Claim that. And then do something to change that behaviour. It's too late, team. When your thesis is over time, it's too late then to not deal with the reality that you haven't worked hard enough. Or move to blame. Blame the supervisor, blame your parents, blame your family. As early as possible, know your denial triggers and start to make changes. make structural changes. A crisis is too late to deal with denial. When you are over time, it's too late to deal with denial. Individuals, universities, the world does not change through a crisis. Does not change through a crisis. We simply become more of what we already are. I'll say that again. A crisis does not transform an individual. We simply become more of what we are. A crisis amplifies our problems, amplifies who we are. So therefore, as early as possible, understand yourself, name your denials, and then start to make an overt intervention. Always remember the old cliche, and I'm old, but I tell you what, I finally got this and it has changed my life. But the time to make a change is when you don't have to. The time to make a change is when you don't have to. We can never get out of denial. We can never be post-denial because we can never actually face the deep truths about ourselves. We can only ever see, if I use Granville Hicks' title from his autobiography in 1965, part of the truth. We can only ever see part of the truth. And of course, denial is on a continuum, and it has to be fought every minute of every day. But please, start that fight today. 2, don't normalise deviance. Now, the first thing I say is, I love the word deviance. I love the deviant leisure scholars. It's a fantastic area. Deviant studies is a great area. So firstly, I love the word. But what I'm meaning by just don't live in deviance is don't live in sort of the outlier, weird, the strange. Don't live way out there and think that that's the Overton window, that's normal, and everything's going well. Because social media lets you do that, okay? Never used to. Social media lets you. You can live way out there and never be touched by reality anymore. So are you creating routines that enable your research? Or are you simply taking stuff for granted? Are you moving through life with a blinkered way of seeing? Are you waiting for something to happen rather than making something happen? Are you, to quote Freud, gee, we've been quoting some Freud in the last couple of weeks, who knew this was a thing? But he used that great phrase, knowing without knowing. That's how he described denial, knowing without knowing. That's interesting. That's interesting. So is denial your normal state? Not the exception. You're living out there. So start to work that out. At some point, the brutalizing facts have to confront you. And if you ignore them, if you dismiss them, it doesn't make them any less real. 3, managing straight talk in supervision. Now, here is a big cultural problem in supervision, but way beyond it. Powerful people too often surround themselves by people who say yes. You know, that's often called, the old cliche was the yes men model. I'm sure there are yes women too, but you know, the yes men model, right? And can I say also in leadership, as we all know, this is the path to decline. So when a leader puts in place people around them that all agree with him or her, the leadership is on the way down, right? So similarly, there's a model of supervision whereby students are a clone of their supervisors. So the supervisors only pick students that are just like the version of their younger selves that they think they were. They weren't. It's nostalgia. But therefore, that group of students are clones of the supervisor. They say yes to the supervisor all the time, and they put up with some really dreadful stuff about authorship, about teaching, about work, about doing work for the supervisor. Now, this is not enabling for your life. and it's not actually productive for research, because innovation in research comes from diversity. But this is also a culture that enables and fosters denial. You see, the best of supervisors, the best of researchers, the best of humans seek out the truths that disagree with them. They seek out the people that disagree with them. And often this is called speaking truth to power. But I understand it is very tough for students to enact this relationship with supervisors, because you as students, you don't have any power. You don't have any power, and therefore you can't speak truth to it. But the best of supervisory advisory relationships are a bit different. They are robust, they are also kind and compassionate, but they are truthful. And if they're not, if you are frightened of your supervisor, then you will continue to live in denial. You deserve better. So you have to ask yourself why you're not claiming better. 4, learn to listen. Learn to listen. Listening is everything. It's everything. Not hearing, listening. Listening is the pathway to learning. In a supervisory meeting, in a supervisory relationship, if there are topics you can never go to, you can never speak of, then that is a signifier of denial. But if you're in an environment which recognises the value of listening, of thinking, of interpretation, that's useful, that's powerful. Just because someone is in power does not mean that they're right. As you've heard me say so often, if someone breathes, they have rights. If someone breathes, you can learn from them. So denial is very difficult to maintain if you listen to a diversity of voices, if you listen to a diversity of views, and you read a diversity of perspectives. Denial can be managed through self-knowledge, which is really hard, I understand that. Self-knowledge, openness to criticism, openness to facts, and openness to perspectives that challenge your own. Academic life is changing, and radically. But so much of higher education is based on nostalgia. The good old days. The good old days when the supervisor was a PhD student. The good old days where the gatekeepers of journals and professional organisations maintained the in crowd and excluded everybody else. Great old days. So, be open to the views of others. And it is actually the best way to start to unravel the states of denial in your life. 5. Think long term. Denial is a short-term strategy. And can I say, and this is important, denial can be a very useful short-term strategy. It does allow you to adjust to something horrible, dreadful, toxic, shocking. Denial does let you manage shock. Okay, it does. If reality is just too tough to bear, then denial and deferral are strong strategies. Do it. But the challenge is how you transform that short-term strategy beyond a comma. We get into something else. How do you move, and wow, this is a hard question. How do you move from being overwhelmed to getting yourself back together and moving forward? Because denial is a full stop. The short-term strategy can become a long-term strategy, and you can't step beyond it. So what do? How do you transform denial into a comma? Firstly, talking to a professional can be incredibly useful for people. So if that's your thing, if you just need to talk with a professional to get you beyond denial, that's great. Do that. Do that. Also, what works is journaling, writing down the ideas, writing through the ideas. Incredibly useful to move beyond denial. So what we're doing through the talk therapy, if you will, what we're doing through the writing therapy is trying to find ways to continue your story. So a terrible thing has just happened to you. Full stop. Full stop. And you sit there. And you can stay there indefinitely. So what writing through it or speaking through it does, it allows you to press play on your own movie. So the movie is not stopped. The movie is your own life, by the way. The movie is not stopped. The movie keeps going on. And it allows you to speak or write the words about what happens next. What are the possible scenarios in your own life? Express the fear. Express the emotion. Try to separate out the irrationality, the fear, and the actual reality of the situation. So write about it, describe it, and indeed, as I've used the language, write through it. Write through it. Don't write about it, write through it. But always remember that the present is better when the truth is faced. Because if you don't, then you are mortgaging your future for the present. Wow. Okay, so this has been probably one of the hardest vlogs I've ever had to research and certainly ever had to write to get it together for you. But it's incredibly important to the comma series. This is a big one because if we are alive, we are in denial. And it is so hard, wow, to separate out truth and the alternative reality, the denial. The actual reality, the stories that we summon, very difficult to align, very difficult to create. So what we have to do is we must struggle at this, because unless we transform denial into a comma, our entire life will slip away from us. Denial cannot be beaten, but it can be battled. And I always remember that great quote. It's a famous one from James Baldwin. Quote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." For me, really, that's denial. That's it. And the moment you name denial, you take its power away from it. You give yourself a chance to battle it and indeed transcend it. Put another way, ask yourself two big questions, and they're not now rhetorical questions. At the start of the comma series, they were. These are now not rhetorical questions. They're about you answering them today. So what are those two questions? You're in the middle of a bad situation. Two questions. One, what am I learning from this? What am I learning from this? And question two, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And if you can answer those two questions, they are the stepping stones away from denial. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.